On the night of October 5th, 2004, deputy sheriffs got a call about a man found lying in the parking lot of a medical center. By the time the paramedics got there, they realized that they were several hours too late, and there was nothing that could be done. The body was identified as 37-year-old Dr. Brian Stidham. Everyone in the community was shocked. In order to figure out how we got here, let's get to know Dr. Stidham a little bit better. He got into Harvard Medical School, and it was no surprise that after graduating, he started his residency in the pediatric ophthalmology in Dallas, Texas. While Brian was in Dallas, he got a little crush on this gal in the neighborhood named Daphne Herding. Well, Daphne thought the brilliant doctor was pretty cute too, and after a few years of dating, they got married in the garden ceremony in '97. In 2000, the Stidhams had their first child, and in 2001, they relocated to Tucson, Arizona after Brian answered an ad in a travel journal for a pediatric ophthalmologist. Unfortunately, only 1 month after joining the office, DEA agents raided his employer for illegally obtaining prescriptions. But not to worry. Pediatric ophthalmologists are kind of a niche gig, so Brian started his own office across town, and his clients just followed him there. And I've been talking about some wonderful things for a while now, which you should know by now means that things now need to take a turn. So one night after work, Brian was scheduled to give a lecture to a group of med students at his office. He brought pizza, drinks, and he kept it brief. 3 hours later, dispatchers got the call about a man found lying in a parking lot. And it was a brutal scene. It looked like he'd been dragged from his car. The car was nowhere to be found, so they assumed robbery was a possible motive. But then something about the scene struck the investigators as suspicious. Brian's wallet with all of his money and his credit cards was still in his pocket. So if this had really been a robbery, why would they not take his wallet? Unfortunately, there were no eyewitnesses to the crime, and not a single security camera in the area to capture it. The next order of business was to deliver the bad news to Daphne Stidham, who was sound asleep at the home with the kids. They called the house, but Daphne didn't pick up, so they trudged over and knocked on the door. They knocked for a while, and when no one answered, they eventually broke down the door. Police found it very odd that the first thing that Daphne asked upon startled awake was, "Has my husband been shot?" Either way, when Daphne was more awake and actually heard what had happened to her husband, she was devastated and told them that there was only one person that she could think of who could have done this: Dr. Bradley Schwartz. Daphne told them Dr. Schwartz was Brian's previous employer who had been busted for illegal prescriptions and sent to rehab. But Dr. Schwartz's alibi for that night was airtight. He was out at a restaurant on a date. So they decided that the next best step was to try and find Brian's car to look for clues. Luckily, there was one important thing missing from the crime scene that the investigators hoped could lead them to their butcher. Brian's cell phone was missing. There was a chance that if the cell phone was still on and they called it, they might be able to figure out a general location of where it might be based on what cell phone tower it pings. They were in luck when they got a hit on Brian's phone just 6 miles away, sitting in his car at an apartment complex. Red stains were found on both the inside and the outside of the car door, as if Brian had just opened it when he was attacked. Unfortunately, they couldn't find any usable fingerprints in the car, and the few hairs and fibers that they did find belonged to the members of the Stidham family. Whoever had done this had prepared and wore gloves. He'd thought through the minor details, and he must have planned it for a while. Was it the other doctor? The investigators still didn't want to believe it, but a background check of Bradley Schwartz revealed a bombshell. That whole illegal prescription thing Daphne mentioned, it was way worse than the investigators realized. When Brian Stidham was hired at the eye center, he had no idea that his senior partner of practice was under investigation. He worked with Bradley Schwartz for a year while their professional relationship began to deteriorate. By October of 2002, Brian gave Bradley his 30-day notice that he'd be leaving to set up his own practice right around the time that the DEA raided theirs. Bradley was indicted on 77 counts. His medical license was suspended, and he lost his privileges to practice in Arizona until he completed a therapy program with the Med Board. So when Brian took the patient base with him, that meant that he left Bradley with nothing when he was able to start practicing again, and he would have to build his client base from scratch. But Dr. Schwartz's alibi had checked out. He was in a public restaurant at the time of the attack, with dozens of witnesses. On a hunch, the police decided to interview Lisa, the lady Bradley Schwartz was on a date with that night. She had told him that halfway through dinner, a man named Bruce came in and joined them. She said at around 8:30 that night, an hour after Brian was attacked, that Bruce showed up to dinner, and Schwartz asked him, "So, how'd those scrubs work out?" Bruce's answer was, "Well, they worked out fine." Police searched Bradley's phone records and discovered that someone had called him from a convenience store payphone just a half hour before Brian's attack. That convenience store? only 400 feet away from Brian's office. The convenience store employee remembered a man wearing surgical scrubs that night who came in to use the phone. The man told her that he was supposed to be in a meeting where they were serving pizza. A half hour after the attack, Bradley Schwartz's phone got another call from a payphone located just across the street from where the car was abandoned. Bruce had previously served prison time for fraud and was currently on parole for a forgery conviction. On the day that Brian's life ended, Bruce was seen walking around town flaunting this huge wad of cash, telling people that it was worth around 10 grand. Surveillance cameras at the bank showed Schwartz cashing a $10,000 check that same day. With that spicy new info, police arrested Bruce out of Tucson, and a few hours later, Dr. Schwartz was in custody as well. Bruce Bigger was convicted and sentenced to life in prison, while Bradley Schwartz was given life with the possibility of parole after 25 years served. And there you have it. The case of an ophthalmologist who was short-sighted when it came to dealing with his revenge plot and was completely blinded by rage and jealousy.